Hi everyone, welcome back if you've been to my channel before. Today we're going to be talking about how university works. So people often get confused about uni because it's structured a bit differently to school, and if you haven't been to university before, you probably haven't wrapped your head around how it works and the kinds of terminology you're going to encounter when you get there. So today we're going to talk about that. I've also got a shirt on that looks not like an identical shirt to all of my other videos. One of my friends told me it looks like I own just one shirt, so I don't, as you can see by this shirt. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a few different things: subjects, study periods, the flexibility you might have in your course to choose or not choose what you're studying, and we'll also talk about some of the terminology that you should know, and we'll talk about grading. At school, when you're studying subjects, usually you choose, say, 5 or 6 subjects and you study them all the way through year 11 and 12. That's not the case at university. At university, you would do 4 subjects per study period, usually. So most standard universities will have 2 big study periods a year called semesters, and in those semesters you would take 4 subjects. So at school you had 4 terms and you took the same subjects through all those different terms. At university, in semester 1, you might take 4 subjects. Semester 2, you'll take another 4 subjects. And the subjects are usually related. They'll usually build on stuff that you've learned in previous subjects. Sometimes you get the choice to take subjects that are outside of your faculty. So for example, if you're studying a business degree, you might get the chance to take a philosophy unit or a literature unit as an elective. And we'll talk about what electives are as well. So basically you take 4 subjects a semester, usually, and you need to take a certain number of subjects in order to graduate your degree. You also usually have rules about how complicated the subjects have to be. So subjects at university are usually labelled in some way. There's usually a course code that will have some letters that tell you what kind of subject it is. It might be nurse, N-U-R-S, so it's a nursing subject, and then 3 to 4 numbers. And the numbers will tell you how complicated that subject is. So usually if the subject number starts with a 1, it means it's a first year subject. So it's the easiest kind of university subject. If the subject number starts with a 2, it's a second year subject. If it starts with a 3, it's a third year subject. If you're taking a third year subject, there'll usually be what are called prerequisites, and you'd be probably familiar with the term prerequisites because there's usually prerequisite subjects. If you're going to university, you usually have to have taken general English or equivalent. You might have had to take maths methods, you might have had to take a science subject, but at university there's usually a prerequisite to take a third year subject. There's usually a prerequisite of having taken a similar second year subject, and in order to take that second year subject, you usually have to have taken a similar kind of first year subject. So they're not just going to throw you into third year subjects without any background in that kind of field, which is helpful. There's also what are called co-requisites at university. So they're subjects you have to study together. You have to study, in some courses, there's co-requisites. You have to take, for example, a placement subject where you're going out and doing work in the real world, and you have to take a putting theory into practice kind of subject where you're learning from your placement experience and then doing assessments that are making that placement more meaningful. I had to do that kind of co-requisite subject when I was at uni. And then there's also something called excluded subjects or exclusions where, for example, you can't take 2 very similar units. So your university will say, oh yeah, if you're taking this unit, you can't already have taken this, or you can't take this other unit in the future, or subject. So that's a good segue into what subjects are called. At university, I try to call the courses that you do subjects because that's more similar to what you would call subjects at school. So that term is really familiar. But if you actually get to university, you're not going to usually hear people calling your subjects subjects. Usually they'll call them courses, and sometimes they'll call them units. But calling them units is more confusing because often your subjects are worth a certain number of units or credits. And if you're calling a subject a unit and the subject is also worth a certain number of units, everyone gets confused. So calling your subjects or courses is probably the easiest way to go. So let's talk a little bit about study periods. At school, normally you have terms. So you have 4 terms per year. At university, like I said, normally you have semesters, and you have 2 big semesters a year. If you're taking your course full-time, probably you'll do 4 subjects in each semester. But a lot of universities are now introducing a trimester structure, so they actually have 3 study periods a year. Bond University have been doing this for ages, and it's why you can do medicine in 4 years, 8 months at Bond. But yeah, other universities are starting to bring this in more enthusiastically. So for example, Griffith now run on a trimester structure, and other big universities have more subjects offered in what they would consider summer semester, which is over the sort of November to February break. So normally at university, your semesters start usually in March, and then your second semester ends in October or November, and then you have usually 4 months off, which is pretty great. Now, if you want to, you have a little bit more choice, and you could take subjects in summer, if the subjects in your course run at that time, and maybe take slightly fewer subjects in semesters 1 and 2. Sometimes students choose to do this because it makes the workload a bit more spread out, and if they're working, they can balance work and study a little bit easier. If they've got, say, 3 subjects semester 1, 3 subjects semester 2, 2 subjects in summer, or trimester 3, if they're at somewhere like Griffith. If you're getting something like Centrelink, you do have to take a certain load, a study load at university, in order to stay eligible for Centrelink. So I'll put some links in the description about that. Basically, you have to finish within, usually you get an extra 6 months. So for example, if you're taking a Bachelor of Engineering and it's 4 years, Centrelink will pay you Youth Allowance for 4 years, 6 months, as long as you're taking at least 3/4 of a full-time load across that period of time. And you'd have to, in order to finish in 4 years, 6 months, you'd have to be taking at least 3 subjects a semester, and you'd have to be taking 4 subjects a semester most of the time in order to finish in 4 years, 6 months. But Centrelink allow you to do, say, 3, 3, 2 in a year across 3 trimesters. That would still be considered a full-time study load. Yeah, so that's good to know. So another question I get asked a lot is, how is a university degree structured? So we talked a little bit about how many subjects you're taking across semesters, and that they're usually complementary or connected, and they usually build on things that you've learnt in the past as you go through your degree. You know, everything should be kind of coming together and giving you a deep understanding of your area of study. But it's good to know that some degrees are really flexible and some degrees are really structured. So, for example, if you wanted to do a Bachelor of Physiotherapy, that degree is very structured. You have to do a very specific plan. You have to follow and do certain subjects in a particular order, and you don't have very much choice. You might have a couple of elective subjects where you get to choose to focus a bit more on working with children or to focus a bit more on working with older people, but most of your degree is set for you. And that's because you need to get registered as a physio with APRA when you graduate. And if you're going into a profession where you have to get registered at the end and you have to maintain professional development requirements as you keep practicing, usually your degree is going to be more structured. And so other examples of very structured degrees are things like medicine, very structured. You have a very specific plan that you have to follow. Dentistry is the same. Most other allied health courses are the same. So nursing, midwifery, occupational therapy, speech pathology. Those courses are very structured. You'll have some choice, but it's usually only a couple of subjects, and most of the course is set for you. The nice thing about that is when you go to enroll for the first time, it's pretty easy. The university is telling you, this is what you need to do. You enroll in those subjects, and off you go. And if it's a profession you're really keen about, then you're probably going to enjoy most of what you're doing, and that's really good as well. But that's like one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be something like a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. Those degrees are really flexible, and it means you get heaps of choice in what you study. The rules in courses like science and arts are that you have to do usually at least one major, but sometimes two majors. And you may or may not have heard the term major before. Basically, a major is a specialization. So you spend 8 subjects learning about a very specific topic. And in arts, it might be English literature or philosophy or French or political science. There's usually, like for example at UQ, there's I think about 35 majors available, and you can choose which ones you want to focus on, and you study some first year units, some first year subjects, some second year subjects, some third year subjects in those majors. And then your degree will say Bachelor of Arts, English Literature and French, or Bachelor of Arts, Political Science and Criminology, something like that. It will show that you did particular majors, but you had a lot more choice. In a Bachelor of Arts, it takes 3 years to graduate, and a major is 8 subjects. If you're doing 2 majors, that's 16 subjects, and then you have 8 subjects that you can choose to use in whatever way you want, usually. So you can usually choose to do, a couple of philosophy units, a couple of international relations units, a couple of interpreting and translating Chinese units. You can kind of pick and choose things that interest you, and then you focus in on 2 areas that you're really keen on, and then those 2 areas are on your degree. Similar thing with science, you can choose a couple of things you want to focus on, you get really deep into those areas, those topics end up on your degree, and you still have usually about 8 subjects that you can use to choose subjects that just interest you. And you may not want to spend 8 subjects going right into depth in that area, but you still want to, do a little bit of study in that area. So that's really good. So that's the really flexible end of the spectrum. Then there's a lot of degrees that sort of fall in the middle, and those degrees are degrees where there's some subjects that are considered to be core. So everybody who's taking that degree will do the core subjects, and then you get to choose the majors that interest you, and you focus in on those majors. So a good example of that kind of degree would be something like a Bachelor of Business. There's usually maybe 8 subjects that all Bachelor of Business students do, and then you choose 1 to 2 majors, so areas you want to really focus on, and you do 8 subjects in those majors. And then you have a degree, and off you go. You may also have heard the term minor. A minor is sort of like a major, which I guess makes sense. The terms are really similar, but you're doing less study in an area that you're keen on. So a major is usually 8 subjects in an area you really want to focus on. A minor is usually 4 subjects in an area you want to focus on, so it doesn't take as long, and you don't usually go in depth. You don't usually take, say, third year subjects in an area that you want to do a minor, but you might take some first and second year subjects in that area. Okay, so I think we've covered a couple of the key terms I wanted to talk about, which were majors, minors, electives. Electives are one-off subjects where you get to choose what you want to do. And most degrees will have at least a couple of electives, which is great. The final thing I wanted to talk about today was grading scale. So in school, usually you get a mark out of 100 for each subject, and then that mark is converted into a letter between A and E. At university, usually you get a mark out of 100 for each of your subjects, and then that mark out of 100 is converted into a number between 7 and 1. 7 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And you have probably actually heard a couple of, phrases about this grading scale that are just floating around in the world. So you might have heard straight 7s. So someone who's getting straight 7s is doing really well. Sometimes you also hear the phrases P's equal degrees, or 4s open doors. In university, usually a 4 is a pass, and that's where those phrases come from. If you're passing, you get your degree, that's going to open some doors. That's an attitude that some people take to uni. Usually, putting effort in and trying to do your best and getting the most out of your degree is going to give you the most options at the end. But yes, if you're passing, you're still progressing through your degree. I'll put some info about the grading scales in the description. It's good to know about it because sometimes if you're applying for internships or for graduate jobs, they care a lot about what your GPA is. And your GPA is your average number. So GPA stands for grade point average. When you get a number between 1 and 7 for each of your subjects, the university will then add those numbers together and take an average to tell you how well you did in a semester, how well you did in a year, how well you did in your degree overall. And employers will often look at that number as well, and they will think, okay, this suggests to me that you're doing really well academically, or this suggests to me that you're not doing that great. And some employers care and some don't. So I've talked to a lot of graduate employers, and some have a minimum GPA that you need to meet in order to be eligible for their graduate program. Others don't care. They're not going to look at that as the biggest, indicator of you doing well. But it's good to know ahead of time that your GPA can be important in your career later, so that you might, think about, okay, if I'm doing well, that's going to open some more doors. If I'm not doing so well, what can I do to improve? If you have a really hard semester because somebody in your life passes away, or you've got a health condition or mental health issues, you might talk to your student support services about what they can do for you for that semester. If you've just basically dropped off the grid and you haven't been doing your assessments, it might be that you try and get some special consideration, and that would help your GPA overall. So yeah, good to know this stuff ahead of time. I've talked to a lot of people who have never heard about this stuff until they're graduating or they've already left university, and there's not really anything that they can do at that point. Knowledge is power. If people tell you about this stuff early, then you can use that to, give yourself the best chance of doing well. Cool. Okay, so if you have other questions about university, please pop them in the comments and I'll try to answer them. I'll put some other links in the description as well to resources that I think are pretty good for trying to understand how university works and wrap your head around some of the key terms. There's a few good resources out there. ANU have a great video about terms at university, and they talk about majors and minors and things like that as well. And hopefully this is helpful to you. All right, cool. If this has been helpful, please consider liking the video. And if you want to hear other videos like this in the future, you might want to subscribe and hit the bell. All right. Have a great day.